before we share, I'd like to just kind of introduce the song. It's a hymn that we all know, but I really want each one of you to listen to the words carefully and think about Jesus' heart and how big it is for each one of us. And in the last verse, I want to ask you all to join us in singing.
Amen. Thank you. Well, here we are at the end of another week, and if I were to do an introduction for Lo-Ammi, I couldn't say very much. Like Seth and like Pastor David Passos, I didn't know Lo-Ammi before he came, and it's amazing how the Lord works, because the worship committee meets and we look at speakers 1, 2, 2.5 years ahead. And we had this spot was the last spot that we had open. We just hadn't been able to fill the fall spot. And we were praying for the right speaker to come and the right spirit to be here on campus. And Lo-Ammi's name came up, and we prayed and we listened to a few talks, and we said, yeah, let's get Lo-Ammi here. And here he is. And such a blessing it's been this week. Can you say amen? Lo-Ammi has, you can tell he has a personal relationship with Jesus. And we saw that especially this morning as he shared from his heart what Jesus has done in his life personally. And that's really the thing that we can tell people. We can go and preach the Bible. We can go and tell all kinds of things. But when we tell what Christ is doing in our lives personally and how he is transforming us, that's the real testimony. And that's what the Lord's business is all about. It's about transformation, not information. And so when we have a speaker here, I just want to ask you to come up, Lo-Ammi. You have blessed us this week with the truth of God's words, and we want to bless you with some music. You know that music you were talking about? Like, where are these people from? Now you can watch us all day long.
Awesome. Thank you.
So just a little gift of thank you, and some music and a devotional book that's written by our students. And just, the appreciation of all that you've done this week and how you've interacted with the kids, with the school. And we've just been blessed. And you're welcome back anytime. All right? Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'm going to try this out. Usually, as you can tell, I speak with my hands, but tonight I'm going to opt to use the microphone. Thank you so much for everything that Fountainview has done, what you guys have done, from the food to the hospitality to the, for the people down there in the crew who has been controlling the slides and everything. Just want to say appreciative, and thank you so much for the gift. Didn't expect that. So, yeah, I'm actually kind of excited to pop those in and take a look at it. So, But this, when I was asked if I could share a 20-minute talk, I didn't know what to speak on. And I know the one continuous theme was, can you please share your testimony? What a better time to actually share a little bit of my testimony with you this evening that leads into what this thing is all about, so communion and about Christ and his sacrifice for us. So I have about 20 minutes, it will be a condensed version, but it is on Audioverse. My sermon is on YouTube. GYC Resources, and as well as my personal YouTube account, and you can hear the whole thing there, but better to hear it in person, right? So I'll share my testimony, but before I do, let's just bow our heads for a word of prayer. Father, we just want to thank you again for the high Sabbath we was able to experience, and Lord, it's been a blessing. I didn't even know that they book speakers 2 years in advance, and you orchestrated and worked it out for me to be able to be here. And dear Lord, as much as people have been blessed and revived and renewed, I leave this place feeling the same exact way. And I thank you for that. And Lord, as I share my testimony, I pray that it may be a testimony that is not mine, but a testimony of what you are willing and capable of doing as long as we surrender to your will. We love you, we thank you, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17 states, therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are becoming new. For myself, I grew up a Seventh-day Adventist. My mother was a 4'10" Puerto Rican woman. My father was a black man born in Boston, Massachusetts. And if you ever met them before they passed away, they was complete opposite. My mother didn't speak English very well. My father didn't know any Spanish. So I don't know how that came about, but I guess, opposites attracts. And, they got married, and before you know it, I was born into this world. I grew up in the church, grew up a Seventh-day Adventist. And I went to a black church. I grew up in a Caribbean church, and I was the lightest one there, right? I was the Puerto Rican boy that was there, and I was someone who literally went to church 7 days a week. From Monday through Friday, I went to church school. Then Sabbath, if you ever been to a black church, it's an all-day event. Right? It's not a church service, it's an event, because you go to Sabbath school, then you have your 11 o'clock service, and after your 11 o'clock service, you have your your choir practice or whatever it is, then you have your AY, then you have your social, and then you wake up Sunday morning and you go to Pathfinders. So I was somebody who literally spent all of my time at the church. So my experience growing up, I don't have anything negative to say when it comes to the church. Actually, the church family that I grew up in really molded me into the man that ultimately I became today. A lot of the principles, I had, I don't know how many aunties and grandmothers and, people just looking out for me throughout my life. My mother really invested in me in the sense that she believed in Adventist education. So I went to private school all my life to my sophomore year where I got kicked out of Forest Lake. But I'll let you know, I'll get to that point in a second. But I grew up in the church, very innocent, to be honest with you. I was somebody who was very sheltered. So I know I'm familiar with this type of environment, with kind of background, right? I remember vividly, and hopefully I'm not too explicit, but you can just kind of see how I was, as innocent as I was, that we had a tent meeting, and there was a couple there that went to the meetings. They wanted to get married and get baptized. And so, the husband and the wife, they said their vows and they kissed. And then I was like, oh, now they're going to have a baby. And my friend looked at me and he's like, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, so they get married, they kiss, and then a baby comes. And they're like, no, that's not how it works. And that's where I got my first lesson. And I was like, what? So, that's just kind of the sheltered environment that I was in. But as I got older, as mentioned, Mr. Apostles was my middle school teacher. I didn't have a relationship with God. And most kids that age don't have a real personal relationship with God. It's a Sabbath. Ellen G. White is a prophet. All of these things, right? And what we considered bad, we end up, dabbling in it. And before you know it, you enjoy it. And music was my outlet, right? And I know for me, music played a major impact in my life because as I kind of reflect and look back, I realized that I was this innocent little child, right? For the most part, very sheltered in the way that I grew up. But the music that I listened to all of a sudden changed my mindset, that all of a sudden I started becoming someone that I really wasn't, right? I grew up in a good home, middle-class home, but but my associations were of a bad influence. I always hung out in areas where, the hood, for the lack of better words, that's where I hung out with. And, went through middle school, and I was never known as a fighter. I was never aggressive. But Mr. Apostle says earlier today that I was very persuasive. I had a thing with words, right? I can talk. So I either talk myself into situations or talk myself out of them. Either way, I was always getting myself involved in some type of mischief. But during middle school, there was my first incident. There was a situation that happened between my father and I. One thing about my parents, my mother had me at a very old age. She had me around mid-40s. My dad was 62 when I was birthed. So you can imagine the generation gap between my parents and I. There was no, I couldn't relate to them. They couldn't relate to me. So I always grew up, right, with older people. So my mentality was always older than my age. So anyway, there was a situation, and that was like the first time that, it got to a point, it got escalated, and I got arrested when I was a juvenile. And nobody ever knew. But the one thing about me, I'm very smiley, as you can tell. I'm very energetic and a people's person. But behind closed doors, I was a devil child, right? Like nobody ever saw this bad side of me because I can put on a good show. So, that was kind of the beginning of, what I would go down a bad path. So after I got out of middle school, things got really bad back at home, where my dad couldn't really handle me anymore. So there was a conversation that I didn't know about that my mother and my father had, that we was going to go to Puerto Rico and we was going to go visit my mother there. And while I was there, his plan was for me to stay there. Well, I didn't know that. So when I saw that, we were packing up and I saw that there was a round trip ticket for my father and then it was just a one-way ticket for me. So, I asked my father, excuse me, Dad, Well, I only have a one-way. He said, oh, you have the whole summer. You can come back after, you can come back after whenever you want to feel like coming back. I was like, okay, cool. I didn't think anything of it. So you can imagine that time is coming. I'm ready to go to Forest Lake Academy. All my friends are going there. It's going to be exciting. And I get the call. I call my dad, and I said, hey, Dad, I'm ready to go back home. He said, oh, yeah, no, you can stay there. And you can imagine the what? What do you mean I can stay there? Yeah, no, I don't want to do anything. Your mother can take care of you. So I talked to Mom. I was like, do you know about this? And she's like, yeah, we discussed that you're going to stay here in Puerto Rico. So you can imagine the hurt, the resentment, the bitterness, the anger I had, because I felt like, all right, you guys are plotting what you're going to do with me. You guys never told me. So at this point, from that point on, it was this rebellion that I had in my heart, because I wanted to be heard. I didn't know how to let go of this aggression that I had. So in Puerto Rico, you can imagine, I didn't know how to speak Spanish. I understand it, and I know there's some who speaks to me in Spanish, and I sound good the first 3 minutes, and then afterwards it goes from Spanish to Spanglish, and then all of a sudden stuttering, and then English. That's just, but I understood it. I understood when my mother spoke to me. So I'm now in this environment where everyone speaks. I'm lost in this new world. But my outlet was basketball. I love basketball. Mr. Apostle can tell you stories on how basketball was life when growing up, right? And so that was my outlet. I wasn't very great academically. I always got myself into trouble. And as I was mentioning before, my tongue is what got me into trouble. And but basketball was the outlet, and I just got a message. It was crazy. From one of my teachers from middle school. He's in Andrews, and I guess my name popped up, and he sent me a message. He's like, Lo-Ammi, long time no see. You need to come and visit. And Mr. Martinez, I'll never forget him. But I say that because, basketball was my outlet. That was the way that I was able to, at least for those 60 minutes, get my mind off of the problems that was there. But unfortunately, I got caught up with a lot of the things there. I started drinking. I started hanging around with the wrong crowd. I, participated in card robberies. Our house, right next to our house was a bar. And all you literally had to do was jump the fence, and you go there and you play pool and you drink. And it was normal for a 15-year-old kid to drink. It's not uncommon, But of course, my mother didn't know what I was doing when I wasn't home. I skipped school and, do the things that everyone else was doing. And for me, I just wanted to fit in. What was my niche? What is it that I wanted to do? And it's crazy because we had a good church group there in Puerto Rico. Actually, we're still good friends now. A lot of them came back into the fold of God. Praise the Lord for that. And but even then, a lot of them was English speaking, and it was amazing to see how on fire they were for God. Out of everyone, my mother was probably the most aggressive in her faith. That would be the best way to say it. When Doña Carmen comes, they know they're going to hear it straight, right? She's a tough love woman. Like Hermana de White, Sister White says, and la Biblia, y el Espíritu Santo, all of this stuff, right? My mom was the aggressive one. So my mom, out of everyone, was known as the most religious, yet I was the one who was the most rebellious, right? So that kind of left a bad taste in people's mouth. But they loved me to death, and I loved them as well. And but it was crazy because when we went to certain areas and certain places, I realized that most of the young people that I was hanging out with, my age, were doing the things that I was doing. But just because they was participating in Sabbath school and singing, it seemed as if they were better than I was. They didn't have that attitude, but in my mind, I'm seeing a whole new reality that I've never seen before. So, unfortunately, it got to a point where my mom couldn't handle me anymore. And I don't know if you watch TV, but there's a show on daytime television called The Maury Povich Show. And there's always this one episode that he kind of focuses on all these bad kids, and they send them to boot camp, and then this boot camp, like, straighten out these kids, right? Like, I got so bad that my mother was going to send me to boot camp. And so when I heard that she was going to send me to boot camp, I straightened up really well, It got to a point where the police officer, there was one particular police officer who will come by every Thursday just to check up on me and take me out to go play pool because he knew what my mother was going through, but at the same time, I was just a kid hurt. And my mother couldn't understand that, but he did. And, so I was in an environment, though I got into a lot of trouble, there was people there to always help me. There was one situation that I wanted to mention before I transitioned before I moved to Florida. In middle school, I didn't realize the power of words, right? I didn't realize the power that I was capable of possessing. And there was one situation that we was in geometry class. And the teacher was writing something on the board. She was writing down a problem or something. And where I was at, everyone was, joking around and laughing. And then the teacher, without even turning around, she says, Lo-Ammi, stop being disruptive. And I was like, well, 95% of the time is usually me. But this 5%, it wasn't me, right? And for whatever reason, I'm the type of person that people will come to me and just share information. Not that I care to know, but it was like, yo, did you know that? No, I didn't know, but thank you. And I'll just kind of plug it in the back of my head and just have all this information about people that randomly tell me stuff about them. And beforehand, they told me some things about the math teacher that she didn't know a lot of people knew, but I knew. So she was like, Lo-Ammi, you needed to stop being disruptive. I was like, well, it wasn't me. I wasn't disruptive. She's like, it's always you. If you don't cut it out, I'm going to send you to the principal's office. So at this moment, I said some things that she didn't know that I knew, and she turned around. She was so upset. She says, class dismissed, Lo-Ammi to the principal's office. Everyone else, you're free for the day. So I go to the principal's office, and you can imagine the conversation that's being had. And she says, and I'll never forget this, she said, either you fire me or you kick him out, but I can't deal with him anymore. I was like, you would quit your job because of me? Like, whoa, I didn't know I had that power, right? So praise God. And this is why I vented the way that I vented this morning about my mother, because she was a saint. She had her flaws. We all do, right? But it's about the consistent life pattern. And she was consistent. And whatever reason, like right before I get kicked out of any school, anytime I'm in a situation where my back is against the wall, my mother will come in with her Spirit of Prophecy book and her Bible, and she says, listen, my son is guilty. He did this and that. But did you follow these counsels first? No, we didn't. Well, if you didn't follow the counsel, if you didn't do this, then, you don't. And before you know it, my mom started becoming friends with most of the staff and faculty there. And there was always moments, it's like, boy, if it wasn't for your mother, just have her call me because I need some prayer. Can you do that for me? Like, yeah, sure, all right. So I always, even though I was supposed to get in trouble in certain situations, my mother just wooed and loved people just because of, just the caring person that she was. So eventually, finally, praise God, I moved from Puerto Rico. I went to, back to Orlando. So my sophomore year, I was there, and I wish I could tell you it got better. It did not get better. I got involved in a lot of fighting. I translated into my stint there in Forest Lake Academy. And I only survived a semester. That's as long as I lasted there. And what happened was a fight broke out, and I was involved into the fight. And after the fight escalated and was broken up, I ended up going to the student center. And the gentleman that I was having a situation with came, and he said some things. And I'm in the middle. I thought I was a big bad boy. And I was like, I wish you would say something to me. Right? And it just so happened that the principal comes out. But with him was the president of the conference as well. And so as I'm saying what I'm saying, I'm about to leave, and the science teacher grabs me. He says, Lo-Ammi, you better go. So I'm leaving, and then I hear the principal say, I want you to go to the office. And then I said some words that would not be Fountainview approved, right? So I said some words, and I said, I'm not going to no office, Fountainview version. And I turned around, and the boss said, so what are you going to do about this situation? So a week later, I was no longer a student at Forest Lake Academy. So my mother couldn't save me from that situation. But I remember vividly that during this time, I was just a lost soul. I was completely out saying what I wanted to say, feel like there was no repercussions, and this is why I get nervous every time that I go to do week of prayers and the principal wants me to come and talk to. I always get nervous. There's just something about the principal's office that makes me feel. So when you asked me to come and visit, I was like, oh man, what did I do wrong? So I just want to say thank you. I'm like, oh really? Okay, that's the first, especially in my life. But I got there and I got kicked out of Forest Lake Academy. For the first time, I'm going to public school. Now I wasn't just going to any good school. I'm going to a all-black school, 95% African American, in the middle of a low-poverty income where 60% of the students drop out. And then all you can imagine, all of the stories. Oh, I heard they have AIDS. They stab people with needles, and it's like, yeah, right? I'm in this environment which is safe, and now I'm going into a whole different world. And the way that I was able to survive was because I was semi-athletic, right? I was funny, I was a goofball. Everybody knew me. And then when I go to public school, everyone is even more athletic, more funny, even more louder than I am. So what do I do to stand out? So I just had to be that much more crazy and that much more loud, right? So that way I can make myself known. And from there, that's where I really started to involve myself. My experience in public school is not as bad as everybody, says when they went. I met good friends that I'm still friends with to today that, we still have conversations. They're all going down a path that is a godly path, may not be Adventist, but they're going down the right direction. And, I'm just grateful for the relationships that I was able to have there. And during this time, during high school, when I got kicked out and going to public school, I was involving myself in the bad situations. I was going to nightclubs, teen nightclubs. I was drinking, I was smoking. I was doing these things. And there was one situation that happened as we went out Saturday night. And Universal Saturday night is like the place that you ought to go. And as I went there, this situation took place that big fight broke out. And as we're trying to break up the fight, there was security guards that came and tried to ask questions, and they got word that it was those guys over here, and I was a part of this group, which in reality we weren't, but one of our friends, his brother was involved in the fight, and we was trying to break it up because he was a man. He was about 13, 14 years old. So as we are getting, as we're just, trying to dismantle the situation, they come and attack us, and they're asking us 50 questions, and we're like, hey, it's not us. And they're like, no, it's you. And, my boy Raheem, he's like 6'4". He was a starting power forward there for our high school, and, they got aggressive with him. And, me, I'm trying to help him, and before you know it, I'm getting grabbed, and I'm frustrated. And before you know it, I didn't know this, but there was a police officer that grabbed me by my arm, and I stiffed up. I turned around, and I swung and didn't know, and all I saw was this shiny little badge. I was like, oh, this is not good. So I get arrested. I go in the back of the cell, and I got charged with obstruction and resisting arrest with violence, which is a minimum. You can, serve time in juvenile for that. But after he started talking to us and realizing, who we were, it was a Spanish cop, actually, now that I think about it. He was like, you guys are not these thugs and whatever you guys are portraying yourselves to be. And he dropped the charges to resisting arrest without violence. So fortunately, I had to go to court for this because I had a prior charge when I was in middle school. So when I got arrested, they found out, okay, he's been arrested before, so I had to go to court. And I remember going to court, and the judge that was doing the cases in particular was Judge Rodriguez. And he was known for his aggressive sentences. His daughter died of an overdose, right, on drugs. So anyone who had like a drug case, it wasn't going to be very good, right? He was going to do some type of time. So I was like the third to the last person that had to go up there. And before I went to the courthouse, my mother said, Lo-Ammi, plead guilty. It's like, are you crazy? I'm going to plead guilty? No contest. That's what that's what the lawyer told me to do, no contest. My father's like, oh, plead not guilty. My mom's like, Lo-Ammi, plead guilty. So, I'm wrestling with this thought. I'm hearing all of the sentences that's happening, and, I'm like, man, there's no way. I'm going to jail. And so I get up there, and I remember that Judge Rodriguez was there, and he says, what do you plead? And I stood there for a second, and I looked to the right, looked to the left, and I saw my mother says, she just nodded. And I said, guilty. And a judge was very surprised that I responded that way. He says, really, guilty? Tell me why you feel like you're guilty. I said, well, I'm guilty in the way that I responded, but I'm not guilty for why I got in trouble for what I was doing. I was there to help my friends. Confusion happened. I should have did, but I'm guilty for my actions. It's like, interesting. Well, I want your parents to say something. Sister Richardson, is there anything you have to say? And man, listen, I don't know. My mother is something special, man. I can't wait till I see her when I get to heaven, because there's these moments that I'm just like, how did she pull this off? So she says, she's like, my son is guilty, Your Honor, and he deserves whatever sentence you give him. I'm like, what do you do? No, that's not a good thing, not a good plan. She's like, but before you sentence, I believe that God raises up judges and he puts people in power. And there's no mistake in my mind, Your Honor, that God has placed you in this position. I see all of these young people who have potential, and she's just going off, and then, the seal that says, in God we trust. And I believe that God will be the ultimate judge, and God sees you as somebody as a reflection of the judge in heaven, and she's dun, 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 and you're a Rodriguez, and before I was married, I was a Rodriguez, and the Rodriguez family, and I'm just like, what in the world? So she sits there, and she's my defense attorney at this point. She's my lawyer, right? And she said, well, thank you, Mrs. Richardson. Brother Richardson, my dad was known as an actor. Oh, phony self, man. But anyway, as the judge concluded his sentence, he says, listen, what you have committed, and because you had a prior record, you would have at least served at least 3 months. But I see the type of parents that you have, and I'm going to let you off with a probation. But you have to thank your mother, because if it wasn't for her, you would not be in this position. So this is why I'm forever grateful for it, right? So I was like, all right, yeah, thank you. So anyway, that was my dad tried to use that as I'm going to go out. No, you're not. You're on probation. You can't go out after 6 o'clock. All right, whatever. But I still found ways to do what I needed to do. And at this point, after I graduated high school, I went to Tampa. And when I moved to Tampa, at this point, I'm not only partaking in drugs, now I'm selling it. My goals was to, be rich and famous. And, I had the sports car. I had the big car with the big rims. And you go to our house and, you were 22, 23 years old, 21, 22 at this time. And, you can imagine, you come to our house that we're renting. Beautiful house in the middle of a nice area, big screen TV. We're living the life, man. Right? So now I'm selling drugs. And at this point in my life, I didn't even have a conscience. I don't know how much time. So just flag me down when I need to wrap up. But I remember that at this point, didn't have a conscience. This was a moment in my life where I went to Orlando. It was about an hour and a half drive. And I bought a car cash. And there was a car that I was going to work on. It was a big body. And I didn't have registration. I didn't have insurance. It was very sketchy. The car it was white, but it was ripped off with all of the police stickers, right? It was an auction car. So I'm driving, right, with a fake tag for an hour and a half on the highway. No license. Well, I had my license, but no insurance, no registration, no nothing. And in the car, I had cocaine and marijuana, hidden where I needed to hide it. And I remember as I'm driving, my tire popped. And as my tire popped, I had to pull over. And I called AAA. We had AAA. We had this scheme that we did with AAA anyway, I'm not going to tell you that. So I called AAA, and they will tow the car with no questions, just show your ID, and they'll tow the car. And right before AAA came, I got out the car. Something impressed me to get out the car and kind of sit, like on the hood of the car where the license plate is at. So I'm just sitting there. And not even 5 minutes after everything happened, a police officer comes. Whoop, whoop. Like, is everything all right? Like, yep, my tire popped. Just getting AAA over here. And for whatever reason, he didn't ask for my license, my registration, nothing. You have a great day. And left. If I could tell you my life experience, that's never been the occurrence when it comes to police officers, right? So the fact that this brother just, whoop, whoop, you okay? Yep, all right, have a great day. Left. Not even 10 minutes later, AAA came, and I was in that car, and I didn't even, those moments where you're like, oh, man, I know I messed up, and your heart is bumping, you're sweat. Nothing, no conscience whatsoever. Like, I was as cool as a cucumber. But I realized at that point in my life, I was just completely lost. And again, it was involving myself in indulging myself in club life and all of these things. And there was one situation where that happened that I think the last weekend before I left, my homeboy came and he says, man, listen, we're going to go out. And this weekend, for whatever reason, none of my friends came. Every weekend, it was like clockwork. I'll have about 20 to 25 of my friends come every weekend and party and then go right back home, right? And this weekend, all of my friends went to Daytona to visit, to celebrate a friend's birthday of his. And so I just hung out with a different group that I didn't really, I knew them because we worked together. And there was a young lady they introduced me to, I'm trying to, woo her and whatever. And, she's liking me, I'm liking her. And I go into this club and there's a whole bunch of they're just roughnecks, to say the least. And as we're walking, they're groping her, they're grabbing up on her, and she's like, she's from New York, so she has in Spanish, so she had this, don't touch me, you don't know me, like she's doing she's defending herself. And all of these guys like, you better be respectful and whatever. So I'm trying to step into this situation. I'm not in my right mind. And I go in, I was like, you heard the young lady, keep your hands off of her. He's like, oh, you tough guy, huh? I'm like, yeah, you think I'm afraid of you, bro? In my heart, I'm like, but outside, I'm like, man, I ain't afraid of you. I don't know if it was 5 minutes or 5 hours later, but all I remember was a tap on my shoulder and just out, right? I don't remember anything. And then as soon I grabbed, the friends that was there with me, I was like, yo, I got hit. Like, who was it? I was like, I don't know. It was this dude with dreads. And so I don't know if it was about 5 or 10 because I'm blurred at this moment in time. And as right before I had the courage to swing, right, the bodyguard grabs me and he throws me out. So the next morning I get report that the young lady was sent to the ER, face bruised, broken jaw, face, everything. I mean, they just did a wailing on her. And I was like, man, if they did that to her, imagine what they would have done to me, right? So it's all of these little moments in my life where I'm just like, wow, like God really looked out for me. Came back home and, I said, I'm not going to go to these clubs. I'll start hanging out in bars. So I started hanging out with my country folks. That's why when I'm out here and you guys are like, doing what you guys do is just a reminder of what, my friends back at home, right? So I was doing more of the college scene and hanging out in bars. It was a little bit more laid back, not as aggressive. But I realized that my dependency was on alcohol. If I couldn't have alcohol, like I couldn't have fun, right? And got to a point in my life, there's other situations, but for the sake of time, I'll leave it for another day. But I remember in this point in my life that there was this emptiness in my life. It didn't matter how much drinking that I did. It didn't matter how much partying I did. It didn't matter what I did. It was emptiness. So I got my certification as a boot camp instructor. And prior to that, before I transitioned into that, there is a story because they told me how much time I have left. There was a moment where we went out to a particular club. It was a grand opening at a club there in Kissimmee, and we told our friends, listen, we don't know anyone here, so let's avoid any situations and any problems. And at this point in time, right before we left, my friend, he bought a pistol, and we just bought a new Cadillac. I had bought a Cadillac, didn't want it anymore, so I sold it to my friend. And he's like shooting the gun and the pistol in the air. And, we're just laughing, having a good time. And I remember distinctly that he popped the trunk. There was a section in the trunk that he had it covered. He placed it there. He closed it up. And it was considered like nobody would know it was there unless you went there and found it. And as we went to this club, whatever, my friend got involved with it. He was talking to a friend that lived in the same neighborhood as he did. And as they were talking, her boyfriend shows up. And all of a sudden, she did this whole switcheroo. She's like, I don't know who he is. I've been telling him to leave me alone this whole time, right? Like completely, sold out. He's like, what? No, I know you. No, you don't know me, babe. Handle. So anyway, this situation blew up. And before you know it, what it was supposed to be a one-on-one fight ended up being 50-on-6. And there was this big fight that broke out outside of the club. Cops was called, and they literally shut down the club, and they sectioned off the roads that's near the club, so that way no one can escape, because it was going to try to find the culprits who handled all this situation. And I remember this moment in time that my friend, he was laid out, and all I can ask him, I said, listen, where is the keys to your car? Because remember what was in there. What is the keys to your car? So I look for his pockets. It's not in there. And if you know anything about the old Cadillacs, there's 2 keys, one for the ignition and one for the trunk. And I found the key, but it wasn't the key to the ignition. It was the key to the trunk. So I run to the car, and the trunk is closed. And I open the trunk, and I look to see where the gun is at, and it's not there. And I think to myself, what happened? And when I told this story the next morning, nobody knew where it was. It was there the next day. But it was there. It wasn't there when I needed it. And I can tell you, Fountainview Academy, I don't know what I was going to do. I thought I was going to shoot off some warning shots, Or maybe I was going to shoot someone in the leg or take someone's life. I do not know. But I know without a shadow of a doubt there had to be a guardian angel who took that gun away and allowed me not to see it or get a hold of it, because he knew if I would have held an unregistered gun that was bought by somewhere and somehow and connected to whatever crime that gun was connected to, all of that would have been on me. And I would not be standing here before you sharing my testimony. And that was really the wake-up call that really transitioned into, okay, I'm not going to the clubs, I'm going to the bars. But yet, in this process, there was this emptiness that was taking place. So I got my certification as a personal trainer because I still loved basketball, and I was wanting to, try to find a way, right? I knew I wasn't going to play in the NBA. But I wanted to at least train athletes into bettering themselves, especially those who have potential and et cetera. So I was a boot camp instructor, got my certification, and there was this young lady, that I ended up meeting, beautiful young lady. And out of all of the things that was happening in my life, now mind you, my money that all I had saved up, gone. The cars that I invested in, breaking down. The roommates that I was staying with, seemed to, they never had money, so I paid for the rent. And before you know, the money that all I had was dwindling and dwindling and dwindling. So as my life is just falling apart, the one thing that was my prized possession was this girl. And I invested so much time in this girl, and, I know she liked me and I liked her, and I don't know, what the word, like I was in love with this girl. I had to be. And there was a moment, I remember there was a weekend she went away, and I was like, oh, I'll talk to you later, and I didn't hear from her. I got an email and says, Lo-Ammi, we just can't be anymore. That was the end of that. No closure, no reason why, whatever. So you can imagine, right, the one thing that's going good in my life is now taken away. And for me, I wouldn't say that I was suicidal, but I wouldn't mind going to sleep and not waking up the next morning, just because of all of the hurt that was happening. So I receive a phone call from my sister, and she says, hey, someone sponsored you to go to GYC. Never heard of GYC in my life. She says, in Louisville, Kentucky, it's a youth conference there. You'll have a ball. And at this point in my life, I was traveling a lot. I was going to Miami, Detroit. I went to various cities, and what I do is every city I go to, I buy a fitted hat from that city. So if that city has a professional team, I buy a hat as my souvenir, right? People collect magnets. I collect fitted hats. So when I go to Vancouver, I'll buy my Vancouver, whoever the hockey team is here. Anyway, so as I'm there, I was like, yeah, I'll consider it, because all this time in my life, I always wanted to travel. So I was like, hey, opportunity to go to Louisville, Kentucky. Why not? So I went, and I remember I took on, I got sponsored. Remember that I got sponsored. Keep that in mind. So I went to the bus there in my local church, and all of the people that was going on this bus was 13, 14, 15-year-old kids. And you can imagine, right, what kind of youth conference this is going to be. I'm like, I'm a grown man. I'm not going to this youth conference. And it's interesting how the devil will use people who are close to you to discourage you. And a friend came in, he's like, hey, man, you going to this conference? He's like, yeah, man, I heard it was a conference for young little jits, man. Have fun. I was like, man, yeah, well, if he knows, then I'm not going to go. So as soon as I made the decision, I'm not going to go, I'm going to go back home, my friend Maurice comes around. He says, Lo, you're going to GYC? Oh, man, bro, you don't know what you're getting yourself into, man. And I don't think he realized those words, what that meant and how that impacted me. I was like, so you've been to GYC? Oh, bro, it's people our age who So he kind of told me the real story of GYC. I was like, all right. So I went to GYC, and as I'm riding this bus, right, mind you, I'm with the big bubble jacket and the hat fitted backwards, and, I have all these questions. And as soon as I get off the bus, there's a whole bunch of people like you there. And I felt like you guys were the weirdest people in the world. The long dresses, happy Sabbath, glory to Jesus, Ellen White's Day, and it's like vegan food. And I was like, what in the world? Where? You guys are so weird, man. Like, mind you, I'm the one who looks different from everyone else, but I thought you guys were weird. But yet one thing that I appreciate about GYC was that there was all these young people that was passionate about Jesus. Like, they was legitimately happy about God. So I went, and, the morning devotions were Sebastian Braxton. He spoke in the morning devotions. I'm not a morning person, but I woke up early because this brother was preaching. He was breaking the word. He was preaching with passion. He had kind of a similar background as myself. So I would wake up early in the morning, and I would go and hear this brother speak. And then the evening time, it was just a blessing. So I'm going to these seminars, and I'm going to these seminars for intellectual reasons, so I can go back and break down, religious topics, with my friends and just show them how smart I am. So as I'm there, Sabbath morning comes, and as I'm sitting there Sabbath morning, there was a young lady I met the night before, and I saw the young lady the next day. And I saw her sitting maybe the third, fourth, fifth row. And as I was sitting there, I was like, all right, well, I can't sit next to her. That would be too obvious. So you try to sit 2-3 rows in front, kind of far right. So that way if she sees you, see, this is why I don't talk with a microphone. But when she sees me, I can kind of turn around and she's like, oh, hi, come. Kind of get an invite to sit and talk. But that didn't work out as planned. And before you know it, all the seats were gone. And my brother-in-law, my sister wasn't there. Mark Filling comes and he preached this message, when God's passion becomes our passion. And he's preaching on the life of Daniel. I'll never forget this. Every question that I had, he's just boom, answer. And he does a little robot dance when he speaks, right? So every time, and it's out of the thousands of people, he has chosen you. There's no mistake that God has placed you in this very moment in time. And for the first time in my life, I felt this struggle in my heart. And I felt this battle between, are you going to accept Jesus, or are you going to continue to live the life that you're living? And I felt this tug in my heart that I can't even begin to describe. But only thing I could do was cry, because it was real. And I remember he made an appeal, and as he made this appeal, he made a specific appeal for all of the workers in the conference, that he wanted to do a special prayer. And it was this flood of people, and just in this moment, the people split, and I saw my sister, and then it closed. And I just broke down and cried, because I remember all the times that my sister prayed for me, that my family prayed for me, and this was the moment that God was answering their prayers. And I surrendered my heart to God at that moment. And for that moment in time, I wish I could tell you I was on fire for God. No, I went back and tried to incorporate God into my life, my previous life, and it just didn't work. And so God says, we're in this place again. It's either all or nothing. So I was like, fine, I'll give you my all. But you have to answer this. You have to answer this prayer. You need to get me out of Orlando, and you need to find me a place where you can fuel this passion and this desire of getting to know you. So what did God do? He opened the door for me to go to Life. I was there for 4 months, and then God answered the prayer, and he moved me all the way to California. And that's where the whole process began. And then 3 years later, I get a call, I get an email. Lo-Ammi, would you be willing to share your testimony at GYC Orlando for the preliminary? And man, you can imagine the nervousness that I had. But that was a surreal moment where I saw how God just led me throughout my journey. I was able to work with the ministry I mentioned before with SALT. We was in charge of the project, service projects, and here I am sharing my testimony to thousands of people who was able to see it online, and who was thousands of people that was there that evening. And here it is that God brought me full circle. And the conference that converted me, that changed me, I'm now speaking at the very conference in the hometown that I did all of my dirt and my garbage in. And for the first time, the city of Orlando received thousands of great controversies that day. So my testimony is quite simple. God has great plans for you. And if he can do it for me, there's no doubt in my mind that he can do it for you. And this is why Christ's object lesson states this. And this is why the communion is so important, because it's a mini baptism. It's a moment in which we reflect on the sacrifice that Christ has done for you and I. And Christ's object lesson says, great as is the shame and degradation through sin, even greater with the honor and exaltation through redeeming love. To human beings, striving for conformity to divine image, there is an imparted and outlay of heaven's treasure, an excellency of power that will place them higher than even the angels who have never fallen. So God doesn't just want to restore me back to how I was. He wants me to restore me into something even greater than the angels themselves. And this is what we're going to be participating here. This is a reminder that Christ wants to restore in us his image, and he wants to place us in a higher place than we can ever imagine and desire. So when I honestly tell you that I'm privileged to be here, just know that I really mean it. I really do. Because I see how God has led me through my life, and there's no doubt in my mind that I am a miracle of God. So my testimony isn't my testimony. It's his testimony. I'm just glad I was able to be a part of it.